Hey there, it's me Olivia. Welcome to my channel. Today we are going to share a story called The Hidden Heir's Shocking Transformation by Brandy. For more interesting and exclusive stories, please subscribe to my channel and visit my Patreon page for early access, link in the description. I could not claim to understand any significant portion of what she said, not truly understand. On another level, though, I could not deny what she said. I had felt that intensity, that power. It was as real to me as the breath that sighed in and out of my lungs as my mind churned. In the end, I had no more option than beareth. Duty is a hard taskmistress when she provides no choices at all. Even death was not mine to choose if there were a chance that we could restore our kingdom through some other sacrifice. Yet what a sacrifice this would be. Still, I nodded. What do we do? Sit here. She pointed to a low stool near her own chair. When I was in place, she took my hands in her own and caught my eyes with her own. The blue jewels that had always seemed so much like my own were now so different somehow. Larger, it seemed, and deeper in more ways than I could measure. I found myself moving forward into that depth as though swept in a current of smooth water, at first quite slowly, and I knew I could draw back, but with gradually increasing speed until I knew just as surely that I had no control at all. Images, impressions, sensations beyond senses began to match me on my journey. They melded with me until no seam existed, and I could not tell which were external and which had always been part of me. The first images were of father, and I thought to study them, but I felt a pull in another direction and knew that mother would hold these to herself. The sensations that next sought me out were like, yet unlike, my own memories. The scenes were the same, the people were familiar, but these impressions were from mother in those same situations, impressions that focused more and more on things she did because of her femininity. Clothes seemed initially overwhelming in variety and purpose, but as they were absorbed into my knowledge, their complexity seemed childish next to those of action within the clothes. I saw her as a young maiden captivate suitor after suitor with a lift of an eyebrow, a glance, a flutter of a wrist, or of an eyelash. I saw her win father with a smile, while that same smile transformed a rival into incoherent rage. The intensity of that long-ago rival's emotion cast me from her mind. I blinked and the merging was lost. When I looked again at mother's eyes, I saw only the clear blue gems that had always comforted me. They crinkled in the corners with amusement, a surprise on this most devastating of days, yet perhaps understandable. So, Deacon, do you still think this is impossible? Or should I say, Charis? The voice that answered her was not my own, though it came from my mouth. This voice was lighter, more musical, more full of life and energy. The register had not changed, my own voice had never dropped much, but in all other ways it was as different as night from day. Or as man from woman. I would not have believed it, but now I cannot imagine we will fail. At least, not because of someone penetrating my masquerade, that strange, musical voice replied. This phrasing seemed to bother her. I saw a note of discomfort pass her face, quickly suppressed, but less deniable now than even in our previous closeness. Before I could ask about it, she had risen and gone to her door. Opening it, she bade the servant request the attendance of the king and such others as he desired. Charis, you will find that after you have fully absorbed the impressions I have shared, you will be able to choose between the mannerisms as you wish, but for now the feminine will be dominant. I'm sorry for the abruptness, but we have no time. Remember always, your duty is as vital and as inescapable as Beretha's own. By this time the king had approached. I still sat on mother's stool, dazed by the flood of thoughts that had assailed me. Lost in my thoughts as I was, I absorbed without registering the conversations around me. Finally, Beretha's voice grew loud. Deacon, wake up, brother. I jerked to attentiveness and swiveled on the stool to look at him. His eyes wore a very strange expression, one that seemed to indicate that I was the source. Yes, Bereth? I mean, Majesty, that strange voice replied from my mouth. All sound in the room ceased. Beretha's eyebrows made an attempt to disappear into his neatly trimmed hairline. The voice from his mouth, though still his own, had wonder in it that I had never heard before. Deacon, he asked again. Yes, I replied, a bit petulant at the repetition. I tossed my hair over my shoulder and stood up. Why was everyone looking at me so strangely? I just stood up, for God's sake. I could feel a most unattractive frown forming on my face, and I fought to keep my features smooth. A glance at Mother from both Bereth and I stirred her to explanation. I have instructed Deacon in skills he will need for his masquerade. In support of that, from this moment forward, this is Charisse, my daughter. Deacon never existed. I wanted you to understand this before the transformation is complete so that there is no doubt that Charisse is indeed Deacon. Your pardon, my queen, Hugh, the Chamberlain interrupted, but that brings up a point that we need to address. It would be best if the succession of the crown were uninterrupted and unambiguous. If we allow Cragdol to crown himself without our own anointed monarch, his claim might be more difficult to unseat at a later date. What do you advise? Queen Celia asked. If King Bereth were to abdicate in favor of, Deacon, and Deacon were crowned before Cragdol could anoint himself, then we would have a much more compelling rallying cry for our people. Bereth smiled in a self-deprecating sort of way and replied, that would be acceptable to me. I was never destined to wear the crown for long, it seems. Let Deacon carry the weight of it forward. He removed the simple circlet of gold that symbolized our nation and moved to place it on my head. The priest interrupted him. Your Majesty, that should follow the anointing, he reminded us all. From the folds of his robe he drew forth a small vial and approached me in his turn. Once again, the ceremony was completed quickly. A drop or two of oil and then the cold weight of the crown. Bereth was right, it was heavy. And I knew it would not get lighter for some time to come. Once again Mother controlled the situation. The advisors wanted to draw me off and begin to involve me in the affairs of the realm, to no good purpose that I could see, but she swept them up with her glance and made them pause. Charisse, the emphasis was unmistakable, and the command just as clear, has further preparations to make. You must leave us alone. What is Cragdol's deadline for our response? Bereth replied, if we do not surrender by dawn, he will execute the next dozen peasant families. Very well. Bereth, we will attend you later. Her words contained the dismissal of the staff and of the so briefly reigning king. When they were gone, she turned again to me. The expression that briefly clouded her face when I talked about none penetrating my disguise had now returned in even greater measure. She paced about the room for a moment, then sighed with a glance at me that made it clear she was not happy with what was to come. Charisse, are you familiar with a maiden's lover? She asked. No, not that I know, and then I paused as her words triggered a memory that had not been there a few hours ago. No, Mother, you cannot. I cannot. It is too much. But the very memories that horrified me were linked to the portion of her memories that justified the terrible device. She waited for my protestations to dissipate. When I ran down, she smiled a sad smile that conveyed her personal knowledge of the price she was asking. It can be survived, she declared. Not for the first time I wondered if Beretha's part were indeed the easier one. Not for the last time either. Yet this was duty no less demanding once the full price was established. What do I need to do? My sigh of resignation brought an even brighter shine to her eyes and a warm embrace. I'm sorry, Charisse. You know that I would not do this if there were any other way. Of course, wistfully I replied, with a tremor in my voice that would have shamed me once. You will need to disrobe, of course, and we had better arrange a bath before you dress in your new attire, she said with brusque efficiency as she summoned the servants. A bath was drawn with scented oils to smooth and protect my skin. At Mother's suggestion, a fine blade was used to remove all my body hair, not that there was much of it. I would have savored the luxury of the bath for a very long time, but as the water began to cool, Mother brought forth my tormentor. This one was my own. We don't have time to have another one made more to your form. It is a good thing that you are slender. A maiden's lover was so named because it had the sole purpose of preventing any other lover from approaching her virtue. It looked like a vest of chainmail woven of the finest steel our land could produce, drawn down to fine thread, but no less strong than an equivalent thickness of plate. In extent, it was designed to cover me from my nether regions to the bosom that I did not have. In between the woven steel formed a tight-fitting corset, sized as Mother had explained to the shape she had posse said as a maiden. Unfortunately, that was not my natural shape, especially in the lower portion that was led back between my legs. This portion of the garment was rigid plate, providing enough room for a maiden's treasures, but requiring my own to be compressed most uncomfortably. A flexible rod, perhaps the thickness of an ordinary bootlace, trailed from the tip of this part of the device, trailed for a surprisingly long distance. The first step in donning it, though, was to slip a soft silken garment at my hips to cover the same area. It was woven continuously without seam or fastening, yet in some cunning fashion it provided sufficient stretch to allow it to pass my hips. The bottom of this tube of silk was closed off sufficiently to provide some cover for my most intimate areas while leaving openings that I knew would be only too necessary when I wore the controlling steel device for days at a time. When the actual maiden's lever was slid up my hips and into position, the corset portion began just above my hips and had eyelets for conventinal laces, though they were set into the rear of the lever on removably flaps. Mother drew other laces, ordinary string, through these eyelets and began to bring the edges together. It took a while. When the tension would become too tight for her to pull, well past anything that I could willingly accept, she would pause and require me to raise my arms, or lower them, or breathe, as though I could, or move as well as I might. After these exercises, she would draw on the laces again. Eventually, the purpose of the long wire leading from the nether guard became apparent as she began to thread it through interlocking loops on the back of the garment. This would only work if the back were fully closed, a condition that the young Princess Celie no doubt found much easier to achieve than I did. The reduction in my waist was so intense that some of the flesh actually worked up into the cups in front, giving me a surprisingly realistic bosom, especially since these cups were themselves stiffly formed. When she was done, she unlaced the long string and removed the lacing flaps, leaving only the thin rod to hold the back together. Please subscribe for the next part and visit my Patreon page for early access. Thanks.